At the end of chapter 4, our character, Rachel Carson, had to make a change in her dreams in order to fit the reality that she was living in. Unfortunately, with the Great Depression, there were not many jobs around, especially jobs for women. And then with the passing of her father, Rachel had to take on the financial hardships of her family because at the time her mother still didn't work because her mother was not allowed to work as a school teacher when she had gotten married. So therefore, it all laid on the shoulders of Rachel to not only support her family, but also to support herself as a female during this time. I want you to think about the title of this chapter, Never Give Up. What does that mean to you? Have you ever given up on something? Have you ever regretted giving up on something? Or have you always stayed determined and never gave up until you reached your goals? Kind of like our character, Rachel Carson. She has shown unwavering, which means constant determination throughout all four of these chapters so far, and throughout all of her life thus far, even after college. So let's read on in chapter 5, Never Give Up, to see what other obstacles Rachel Carson will face, and if she will indeed face them with determination. Chapter 5. It was the perfect job for Rachel, and the weekly broadcast soon became a huge success. Not long after she started, Rachel was asked by Mr. Higgins if she would like to write an introduction to a booklet about fish. Rachel jumped out the chance. She stayed up late writing the piece. She wanted it to be perfect. When Rachel showed the introduction, The World of Waters, to Mr. Higgins the next day, he shook his head. Rachel was surprised. What could be wrong with it? Rachel's boss told her that the introduction was too good. He told her it should be published in a magazine, not in a government booklet. Although Rachel loved her job, she still wasn't making enough money to really help her family. She started writing articles for magazines and newspapers to earn extra money. All this work meant Rachel didn't have much free time, and she was tired a lot. But she was doing what she loved, writing about nature. Rachel decided to try to sell the piece her boss had called too good. She did some more work on The World of Waters and sent it to the Atlantic Monthly, an important magazine that was known for recognizing new writers. They agreed to publish it for Rachel if Rachel made some changes and gave it a new title, Undersea. When the article appeared in the magazine, Rachel showed it to Mr. Higgins. Once again, Mr. Higgins shook his head. Now, what could be wrong with it, Rachel wondered. This time, Mr. Higgins said it should be an entire book and not just a magazine article. Rachel's boss wasn't the only one who thought her work should be more than an article in a magazine. Quincy Howe, an editor at Simon & Schuster Publishing Company, and William Van Loon, a famous naturalist, both wrote to Rachel. They persuaded Rachel to turn her article into a book. Because Rachel was a perfectionist and because she was also working full-time, it took her 3 years to finish her first book. But in 1941, Under the Sea Wind was published. Her book was filled with stories and interesting facts about the creatures that lived in the sea. It also showed how their lives were all connected. Rachel used words that someone who wasn't a scientist could easily understand and enjoy. Rachel's book received excellent reviews, but it didn't sell well. 1 month after Under the Sea Wind was published, the United States entered World War II. Suddenly, the country was at war, and people were worried about how their lives would change. No one was interested in reading a book about sea life and the ocean. Rachel was upset that even though the book got good reviews, very people bought and read it. She even told a friend, don't ever write a book, because she was so discouraged by the lack of sales for Under the Sea Wind. The Fish and Wildlife Service, the new name for the Bureau of Fisheries, was very busy during the war. They moved their offices from Washington, D.C. to Chicago in the spring of 1942 and hired Rachel to work on the Food from the Sea series. War rationing meant that people were eating more fish and less meat. The food from the sea bulletins were a way to teach people about different kinds of fish. In the spring of 1943, the Fish and Wildlife Service moved back to Washington, D.C., and Rachel moved to a house in Silver Spring, Maryland. Rachel's mother, brother, sister, and nieces all depended on her and lived with her at various times throughout her life. So, although she had just been promoted, it was difficult for Rachel to support herself and all of the members of her family. She continued to write magazine articles in addition to her job at the Fish and Wildlife Service. Here's a little article on the World War II and rationing. World War II, also known as the Second Great War, was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. Much of the world, including most of Europe and Asia, was involved from the very start. But the United States didn't enter the war until 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval station in Hawaii. Because of the war, many products were in short supply, everything from metal and rubber to meat and butter. By 1945, many of these products had been rationed, meaning that the families were only allowed to buy a certain amount each week using government-issued ration stamps that look like this picture here. So, the events of World War II gave Rachel plenty of ideas. There was much research done about radar during the war. It inspired Rachel to write an article about bats and how their sonar skills are like radar. The article was called "The Bat Knew It First." The U.S. Navy Recruiting Office called it one of the clearest expositions of radar yet made available for public consumption. As always, Rachel wanted the science of the natural world to make sense to everyone, too. The atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in August 1945 ended World War II. It was a relief that the war was over. Maybe life could go back to normal. But those powerful bombs made a lot of people, including Rachel, realize that the destruction could have a very bad impact on the entire planet. Rachel wanted everyone to understand that people and the decisions they made had a big effect on the environment and every other living thing. The earth had to be protected. That was the end of chapter 5. Ending with a powerful statement saying the earth had to be protected. Think about that statement. What do you think is going to be Rachel Carson's next big accomplishment? What is going to be her next big dream or hope? And how is she might be able to accomplish this? Rachel's a very determined girl who never gives up on her dreams, no matter what obstacles she is faced with, whether it's financial hardships, another world war, a loss of a family member, or a new job. Rachel continues to trek on and stay determined and make her life, as well as the life of others, even better. Now it looks like she's looking even farther, even larger at what impact she can make on not only the lives of her closest friends and family, but now it looks like the lives of everyone around her, including the creatures that live among us. See you tomorrow for chapter 6.